Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome one and all to another Cladding Matters, featuring Hamish McClay of Search Convey and myself, the man with many purple hats. We are here to talk about all things cladding, building safety, and the failure of some councils to recognise what has been right in front of their face for many years. But we'll get to that, but let's start off with a word from Hamish. Hamish, will you start us off, please?
Well, we're very fortunate today to have one of our regular compatriots with us, who is, as we well know, who is actually a captive within Royal Artillery Keys. We're very fortunate today to have somebody who has a vast amount of knowledge relative to this. When Steve and I got together and started speaking about this with Gareth, we felt the Cladding Matters was an important thing because it covered the whole of the country, and it was important to everybody that we get this thing right for us to enable us to move forward. Now, unfortunately, we were stopped partway through our campaign work or our educational work because the very council that are responsible for what should be going on at Royal Artillery Keys have acted in default. They have acted against what the residents have actually been saying for quite some time now. And therefore, it's important we reinforce, before we get on to the much wider matters that Matt Hodges-Long is going to bring to us today. I think it's better, we do need to reinforce this about the particulars of the council. Greenwich Council, fortunately, as a result of the by-election they had last week, have lost one of their Labour members. And the Labour member that they actually lost, they didn't actually lose. She was forced to resign because the council was not acting in the best interests of the residents, or so she thought. But she was if you like, she was overstepped by the council leader, who turned around and said, no, this is what we're going to do, whether your residents like it or not. He didn't actually say that. It's me that made that up, but that's more or less what we imposed. Best you resign. So resign she did. Unfortunately, the Green Party actually took the particular position. So what that does mean, that's a thorn in the side of the Labour Council. The Labour Council, however, is still sticking to the fact that they didn't have any evidence that any contravention of the whatever building regulations were in process at the time of the build. They don't have any idea that there was anything wrong with the place at all. It's perfectly sound. So what the title is about, the Grenfell on screen, every single council member, particularly Labour members, I don't want to bring the politics into this, but we have to, I fear, that the Labour members of the council should all sit down in a darkened room and watch that Netflix documentary about Grenfell and still carry on denying because they between them are all denying that evidence exists relative to the safety of the build of that particular property or all those properties at Royal Artillery Keys. More than 1,000 residents suffering. Now, let me pass on now. I've said more than enough.
Oh, it was a great introduction, and it sets the tone. Steve, what is the latest? And please, can you set us straight on this? Greenwich, they haven't come to their senses yet, I take it.
No, it's now week 11, and they've maintained their position that based on all available information that the council held, 11 weeks ago, they stated there was no evidence of any building regulation breaches at the time of construction. And that was, they also made it explicit that that wasn't just the councillor's position, but that of the whole council. So it's highly damaging because our internal remediation isn't signed off and they're trying to get out of checking all the walls internally. They just want to do above the front doors, and that would need a type 4 compartmentation survey, and they're just not prepared to do it. But it does help if the council said, well, there's no internal defects anyway, which is effectively, without being explicit, what they've done, because they've said there's no defects anywhere at the time of construction.
Oh, I see. So they've gone for the blanket statement, which then obviates the need for doing any extra surveys. Oh, there's nothing wrong here, nothing to look at.
And that's why it's damaging. And we have to win, because we do not want a bill like we saw in the Olympic Village of £430 million worth of internal defects. That isn't the cladding that's got all the attention in the media. This is this very quiet internal walls that basically no one talks about. There's been, well, we'll hear from Matt Hodges long on some of this, but internal defects are very serious and have caused fires. And we do not want to be in a position where A, we're unsafe, and B, we're paying all this money because a councillor's undermined us. And I'd say, as we're talking about Grenfell and that amazing documentary, please, 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 all those that watch this regularly, please take the time out to watch the Grenfell documentary, because it is a tale that is playing out now. It isn't a tale that's playing out then. That tale happened, but what you think has happened with the Building Safety Act hasn't happened. The watered down regulatory environment that was where I think David Cameron was saying a bonfire of regulations. Well, we're doing it again with the post-Grenfell regulation remediation standard, which is this PAS 9180 we've been banging on about. Well, we'll hear from Matt. I won't say any more, but we all know that if this repeats itself, it will basically mean that everyone that's campaigned, like myself and many leaseholders around the country, were ignored in the watered down remediation standard. If a fire happens, you know, we challenged it. We challenged it passionately for 5 years, and the Earl of Lytton has done his bit too with his legislation. But yeah, let's hear from Matt.
Well, I commend you on everything you've done so far, but welcome to the show, Matt. One thing I would say, and I'm feeling a bit mischievous today, they're only internal walls. I mean, who really cares about the internal walls? It's only outside fascia we really care about, isn't that right?
Absolutely not. It's not what I care about. Is it worth me giving a bit of intro for anyone?
Yes, please do, Matt.
Matt, intro away.
Okay, so I'm Matt Hodges, as long as it says on the screen. I'm the founder of the Building Safety Register. What we actually do as a business, and we were doing before Grenfell, is we save lives and careers with technology. So we build technology solutions and manage data relating to risk management, compliance. Effectively, if you get those things right, you kill fewer people. And the fewer people you kill, the better your career is often, and the inverse is true. Unless you work in Ministry of Housing, and then your career actually flourishes after you get named in the Grenfell documentary. We may come on to that. But for normal people, in the normal world, if you're an MD or a CEO or whatever that's been responsible for killing a lot of your customers or your staff, that isn't usually a good career move. And therefore, our conjecture is that by managing risk more effectively, you are less likely to fall under that proverbial bus. So that's what we do as a business with technology. What we're driven by, and I think is important to mention, values, is that we've always had the same core values as a business from when we set up over 11 years ago. And that was, we call it our CHI, which is commitment, humanity, and integrity.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Everything we do, we benchmark back against those values. And so, for example, if we're looking at inking a partnership with another company and they don't meet those core values, we don't work with them. Good. Similarly, if a government is not adhering to those values, we will call it out, or a regulatory body or whatever. So the building safety crisis absolutely falls into our wheelhouse from a values perspective, but also from a technology perspective.
Right.
And then we layer on top of that the two founders of the company, myself and Richard. He's a military engineer by trade. I'm a construction manager by trade back in the day. And we both ended up in risk management and compliance later on. So I mean, really, in terms of understanding the nuts and bolts of this crisis, what's going to play out in the future, how you maintain compliance, etc., or achieve compliance, is very much our bread and butter.
All right, but the point that Steve has been making is that internal doors, as he calls them, the quiet, unassuming stuff that people don't really make a fuss about, they're still effectively being ignored in this whole process.
Yeah, so to think of compartmentation as being, if you can imagine a shoebox from Clark's or whatever, and that's a flat. Typically, one or two sides of that shoebox will be the external wall. The lid of the shoebox is the ceiling. The bottom of the shoebox is the floor, and then typically the one short end of the shoebox will be where the front door is into the flat. So that forms a compartment. from a fire perspective. And the idea is that the compartment, if there's a fire inside it, if everything is closed, should contain the fire for long enough for the fire service to come, put the fire out, etc. Which theoretically means that if you're living above, below, or to the sides of that fire, the flat that has the fire in it, you should be able to carry on sleeping in your beds and wake up in the morning and somebody will tell you there's been a fire and it's terrible, and the insurers will come in and fix the fire. And that's the background to the stay put policy, which is why buildings don't have communal fire, or, fire alarms into each of the flats that are interconnected typically.
Right.
And what Grenfell did was it exposed what can happen when the external wall of the compartment gets breached and fire can spread that way. What we haven't been focusing on is all the other faces of the compartment internally. And for a stay put policy to work and for compartmentation to work, you need to know that all sides of that compartment have the correct level of integrity.
Obviously, you need to make sure that if you're espousing a modus operandi that involves not moving when there's raging fires everywhere, that your box is a safety cell. If it's not, if it's one side of it's open, then you're condemning people to certain death. One thing that Steve has often banged on about that I just don't think gets enough airtime is at the base of, at the bottom of each of the shafts of in Royal Artillery Quays, there's supposedly a fire door, but there ain't one. That's ridiculous, is it not?
Yeah, especially when it's a single means of escape. I mean, effectively, what you've created there is a chimney.
Yeah,
and we all know what chimneys do with smoke and flame, etc., etc. So, depending on where the problem is, talking of the Grenfell Uncovered documentary, I mean, the testimony was harrowing, but I think for most people, the most harrowing part was when Luana Gomez, the young girl, was explaining what it was like to go down an escape stair when people have collapsed on it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that we often overlook is I think often people think about evacuating a building in, peacetime. When you're doing it in wartime, when it's full of smoke, there's people on the staircase, etc., etc. So why on earth would you not do anything other than worship that escape route? Why would you, of all the places you could breach regulations, to my mind, an escape stair would be the last place that you want to do that in terms of how many people you could potentially kill through that action.
Now, I seem to remember, Steve, there's also an issue with the glass there, so much so that the inspectors from the fire brigade stated they wouldn't be happy to use it as a means of getting up and down the building should it be a light. Matt, this just appears to be an incongruous position.
Yeah, it's an odd one. I'm not sure how else they would access apart from the outside. If you can get to all the faces of the building, if you were looking at rescuing people. So are they saying that they would refuse to fight the fire because it would be too dangerous?
Let's pass straight over to Steve on this.
Yeah, I mean, so it's more from the National Fire Chiefs. They want a single escape stair to have no combustible items, basically. And what the building safety regulator approved 3 weeks ago was a remediation that leaves a load of combustible Euro Class E XPS panels on our fire shafts going right up the 16 stories, apart from 2 panels that they link to the nearest to a terrace going halfway up.
And this stuff is functionally equivalent to a firelighter, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Euro Class E. The definition is offers a high contribution to fire. And it's the second most highest rating for combustibility on the Euro class rating. But I think what would be interesting for Matt to answer is so we've got a change, haven't we? We've had some news about the building safety regulator. I don't know if you want to just mention that, Matt, and what your views are.
So at, I think, just after midnight or early hours of the morning on Monday, the Ministry of Housing announced that they were going to take the building safety regulator away from the health and safety executive and move it into their own department, into the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And in tandem with that, they were appointing the current or the outgoing commissioner of the London Fire Brigade and one of his direct reports to be the non-exec chair and chief exec of the building safety regulator, respectively. And that's due to happen, we think, in early October, late September, early October. So, you know, we can discuss the pros and cons of that, but really, for me, you're changing the management for some reason, but there's been no real indication of what's going to change from a process perspective.
Is that, in your opinion, look over here, don't look over there kind of tactic?
I think I did describe it somewhere as a dead cat announcement. There's a lot of pressure inbound. There's a Lord's inquiry through their regulatory committee.
I think it's almost Schrodinger's dead cat, because I'm not even sure there's a cat there at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, remember, we're 8 years beyond now, and to give context, so six, 7 months ago, the Grenfell inquiry stage 2 report was released,
right?
And it had nuggets in it, for example, to define what a fire engineer is, or create more master's courses in fire engineering, those sorts of things. And the government sort of said, with lots of warning, "Oh, thank you for your report. We'll look into this and we'll get a committee together," or whatever. So that was 6 months after that event. I mean, to me, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, if there is a lot of demand for fire engineers and we don't have enough, we need more courses to get people upskilled to be fire engineers. So why do you have to wait until you're kicked and prodded and written into a report, which I have here, handily by me? But why do you need to do that when you can just get on and do the right thing? And you know, all through 58 recommendations, virtually all of them are no surprise, no shock. Get on, get ahead of it. But there does seem to be an institutional unwillingness to change within the Ministry of Housing and the government more broadly.
And my experience with the fire brigade is, you know, we have 8 buildings here at Royal Artillery Quays, and each one is missing the fire shaft fire doors at the base, which we discussed about. And that was a building regulation breach at the time of construction, as confirmed by Greenwich Council Building Control. But also, it was picked up by one of the enforcement notices. Now, the other 7 buildings who have got exactly the same defect, and the missing fire door and the single escape stair, now they've all been downgraded to notice of deficiencies. And I've argued with the Assistant Commissioner about that. And it seems to be that they want to take a risk-based approach rather than enforcing the law, which they are right to say that they do under the fire safety order, which is different from enforcing building reg compliance. But my worry is it's going down the whole partial remediation that we're seeing, standard that we're seeing with PAS. This PAS 9980, and we're going to go even further potentially down the risk-based approach, which, as we've seen with the panels, you know, are going to cause people potentially safety issues with the rise of e-bike charging in stairwells. And also, I don't think the insurers are going to be too happy about insuring all this building risk. I don't know if you think about that, Matt. Is it, you think this going down a risk-based approach to help build more houses faster?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a number of things to unpack there. So the first one is that all we have to do is look to the announcement about the management changes, and it went through the sequence of Ministry of Housing gave a statement, the Building Safety Minister Alex Norris gave a statement, Andy Rowe, the current LFB Commissioner, gave a statement. All 3 parts of that statement all referred to, we've got to build 1.5 million houses. We need to unblock the backlog. We need to build 1.5 million houses. There then was a statement from Sarah Alban, the chair of the HSE, who have been relieved of this duty, and her statement said, we established the building safety regulator, and I'm paraphrasing, we established the building safety regulator to protect residents from the risk of fire and structural collapse, etc., etc. So it says to me there is a new regime, and that regime is very much focused on stopping the blockers and enabling new housing to be built. My view is it's really important we do build new housing stock, but we don't do that on the backs of residents that live in the current stock. We don't imperil and endanger millions of people to create more property. And I'm quite relaxed now with the new regime and the combustibles ban, etc., that the quality of new build projects from now should in theory be better than it was in the past. The massive issue is the hundreds of thousands of blocks that may or may not be safe that are already occupied.
Yeah, we've talked about it in the past. I want to get a comment from Hamish. You've heard all this now. You've got Matt, who is our stats man, who's actually been literally pulling it all together at the back end, and Steve's been banging around this from day one. What's your reaction to this, Hamish?
Well, we have so many avenues that we need to actually sort of go down and to understand. I mean, it's one of the significant advantages of having somebody like Matt with his knowledge available to us. Steve, of course, the work that he's been doing, yes, it's because of the situation he was made aware of that he's living in, which enabled him to actually take it out. And let's start speaking, because it is an issue. It's not just Royal Artillery keys. And what we have established with Matt coming along is you have to come along a lot more to give us a greater understanding of really the enormous mess that people have got into. And I'm rather pleased. One of the things that does give me a bit of hope, because this was always a big challenge, as to the standard of new build that we could expect. But from what Matt's just pointed, it looks as though they have that under control. But are we not going to see the sad aspect is, are we going to get away with this minimum type approach that so many of the builders are actually making use of? The councils are supporting it. Don't forget, this is what we're speaking about, that the councillors actually are supporting what the builders are saying. Hey, look, it doesn't matter. Put something up so it looks as though we are doing the right thing. Looks as though we're not doing the right thing. It looks as though we're doing the right thing. And the insurance people, hey, we're not hanging on to this. We can't reduce the insurance because of the consequences of what you're leaving combustible materials there. You're leaving combustible aspects within that building. We can't actually turn around and say, that's perfectly okay.
Okay, look, I before we wind this whole thing up, I want to thank Matt. Thank you so much for taking the time out to appear today. It's totally appreciated by all of us. Steve Day, as ever, fighting the good fight. And of course, Hamish McClare of Search and Convey. I want to we've had some comments, which is lovely. We don't always get comments, but it's nice to know that people are watching. First of all, Monica Norrington says, always so informative and interesting. Looking forward to next week. Well, thank you very much, Monica. We've also had Stuart Parker who said, maybe more courses. That's a good thought. And also, he said, insurance are well aware of non-compliance and I'll take the policy and not just pay out. It's not going to save lives. Well, any last thoughts on that, Matt?
I can completely understand why insurance companies sort of take the view that they do. You know, that the building regs are built around life safety, not property preservation. And so in theory, as long as you burn the building to the ground slowly enough, you can still burn the building to the ground.
Hooray! Burn it slow.
Yeah, as long as everybody can get out, then it's successful. Which personally I don't subscribe to. But that's the way that the approach that's being taken.
Okay.
And Matt, just very briefly, just because I think it is something you're aware of, we don't have the data on all the buildings even at this stage, do we?
No. Even high-rise buildings, the 13,000 high-risk buildings, are not properly registered with the regulator. They don't have the full suite of information, and it's not being enforced. So then, when you go down through the heights, the lower the height of the building, the less information anybody will have about it, and therefore, trying to crunch the numbers like I do and work out what's going on and what things might cost is nigh on impossible, because the numbers are bouncing around all over the place.
And finally, just for the viewers, you're tracking prohibitions, these forced evacuations. I don't know if you just want to say what your latest number is. Yeah,
so we're at 56 blocks prohibited, which is effectively the worst case scenario. This is the fire service or the local authority telling people they're going to get out and do not come back. This building is dangerous until it's fixed or demolished or whatever. It totals just under 14,000 people that we can track.
14,000 people forcefully evacuated.
Yeah. And if you look at Steve's scenario, that could add, if it went to the logical conclusion of an enforcement notice that wasn't complied with, at least a prohibition, that could be another 1,000 people added to that number in one block, in one development. And this is why the fire services are so loath to do this, and the government don't like it because it hits the headlines, that why we're seeing this, what we would call a proportionate approach to building regs breaches or safety or whatever you want to call it, that I just really hope that one of those blocks where they should have taken that action doesn't end up like the next Grenfell, and everybody's then looking at, well, why didn't you enforce, or why did you downgrade enforcement to notice of deficiency?
All right. Well, look, I need to bring this to a close. I just want to thank all of you for attending. Matt Hodges-Long from the Building Safety Register, Steve Day from buildingsafetyscheme.org, and of course, Hamish McClay of Search and Convey. Now, when issues like this are not being listened to, Steve and I often bash our heads together and come up with a tune that we think will represent it. We hope you enjoy.
Fingers dusk in Woolwich town. Council in the corner trying to shut it down. No breach, they said with a knowing grin, while the render flakes and the fire creeps in. Signed off but not safe. His silence fills the empty space. He wrote the rules, then looked away and let the risk just sit and stay. 4 statements, 4 spins, but your own words throw stones through your own glass skin. Dot and dab bodge from day one. Now you say there's no breach. Go on, son. Spacing wrong, no fixing shown. Reports say burn, but you condone. Objectivity, that's your claim. Even hand it while you play the game.
Smoke and glass, the stories crack like brittle glass. You dug the past, but truth don't flinch, it holds you fast.
Breach ain't failed it. Weber failed it. Even your own inbox bailed it. But here you stand, smooth tie, hard stare, saying talk to the BSR like you weren't there. 418 flats and fears, hand delivered down for 2 straight years. You don't see breach, you don't see guilt. Then what the hell was even built?
Smoke and glass, your echoes never lost. You wrote the past. Now we light the match.
You can't silence truth with a council stamp. You can't whitewash facts with PR damp. The letters are yours, but the fire, that's ours to survive. Do what is right by the people you state you serve.
Thank you so much. Until next week, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and please try and look after that mental health. Bye-bye.
There's a tale about some folks with hammers and some nails. They'll promise you the moon, but their word always fails.